They called themselves gentlemen, protectors, men of virtue. They dined on silver, prayed in churches, and spoke of honor and family. But behind the walls of their grand plantation homes, power turned into something filthy, something hidden, something no one dared to name. These were men who claimed ownership not only of land and bodies, but of silence itself. They ruled a world built on human suffering, where skin color defined not only your worth, but your right to say no. The plantation system was the beating heart of the American South, a machine of wealth and domination that turned people into property. It was a world obsessed with control over land, over labor, over lineage, and most disturbingly, over the most private aspects of human life. This story isn't just about slavery. It's about the power that hid behind closed doors, the power no one dared name. In the 1700s and 1800s, across the vast fields of the South, life moved to the rhythm of cruelty disguised as order. White columns and polished manners masked a kingdom built on terror. Every plantation was a small empire ruled by one man's will. His word was law, his desires unquestioned, and when the sun went down, his power grew even darker. They called it a way of life, but it was a system of ownership so complete that it stripped people not just of freedom, but of their very humanity. The enslaved were forced to obey, to serve, to bear, and to remain silent. And among them, women carried a special kind of suffering once so disturbing, so unspeakable, that even history tried to bury it. They were called house servants, favorites, or companions. But those words hid a dirtier truth. Behind every polite title was the shadow of coercion, of control, of fear. These women were trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. To resist was to die. To endure was to survive. Masters spoke of themselves as moral men, protectors of virtue, defenders of civilization. Yet, in secret, they turned the enslaved into victims of their own perverse desires. They justified their acts through the twisted logic of ownership. If a man could own a woman's body, then he could do whatever he wished with it. Every touch, every violation, was masked as privilege. Every birth became profit. The law itself protected the abuser. A child born to an enslaved mother belonged not to the father, but to the master. It didn't matter if that father was the same man who owned the mother. The system rewarded exploitation. Every pregnancy was an addition to wealth. Every newborn life, another chain in the master's legacy. This wasn't passion. It wasn't love. It was power naked, raw, and obsessed with control. The white masters turned human lives into property, and even their desires into commerce. The women they violated were forced to carry the children of their oppressors while being denied the right to call themselves mothers. Their tears became part of the soil, watered by generations of silence. They called it civilization. But civilization built on cruelty is nothing but decay dressed in lace. And the deeper you look, the filthier it gets. The plantation was a kingdom of flesh and fear. Its laws were written in pain, enforced through silence. Every master ruled like a god, and every enslaved woman learned to move carefully through the shadows of his power. She learned when to speak and when to disappear. She learned that her smile could protect her life, and that her tears could condemn her. She learned that even her body wasn't her own. Behind every curtain, behind every polished table, and every Sunday sermon, there were secrets too filthy for daylight. Some masters kept separate rooms, hidden quarters, where they summoned the women they desired. They called it custom. They called it nature. But it was rape, hidden beneath manners, sanctified by law. They were never alone in this corruption. Overseers followed the master's example. Sons learned early that ownership meant access. Neighbors gossiped but looked away. The entire system was built to protect the predator, not the prey. And the white mistresses, wives of the masters, trapped in their own gilded cages, often turned their pain into cruelty. They punished the women their husbands abused, taking revenge on the powerless because they couldn't strike the powerful. The enslaved women bore the burden of both hatred and desire. They were beaten for attracting attention they never asked for, and beaten again for refusing it. Their very existence was a reminder of the system's hypocrisy, a living proof of white men's sin, wrapped in black skin. And so, to keep the illusion of virtue alive, these children were erased, sold off, hidden, forgotten. The masters turned bloodlines into ledgers. Every birth, every sale, every mulatto child became an entry in the record of profit. Even the most disturbing unions, father to daughter, master to child, were written in the same cold ink. What should have been love became arithmetic. What should have been a family became inventory. And yet, Within this world of filth and cruelty, there was resistance, quiet, unseen, but fierce. Some women fought back with words unspoken, with glances, with escapes, with a refusal to break inside. Some risked everything to run, to hide, to reclaim a small piece of the life stolen from them. Harriet Jacobs wrote of hiding for 7 years in an attic, watching her children grow from the cracks in the wall, because her master would not stop hunting her. She turned her suffering into a weapon of truth, writing what others were too afraid to say. Her story was not unique. It was the echo of countless others whose names were lost. The fields whispered their stories in the rustle of the cane, in the cries that broke the night. Every voice that was silenced became part of the landscape itself. When slavery ended, the chains were broken, but the silence remained. The women who had survived carried their pain inside, invisible to history. Their children grew up never knowing the full truth of their blood. They learned to keep quiet, to bury the shame that was never theirs to begin with. Generations passed, and the truth sank deeper into the soil. But history has a way of bleeding through the cracks. The lies of purity and civilization began to rot from within. Diaries, letters, and birth records revealed what had always been hidden, that the so-called men of honor had built their legacies on violence and fear. The proof was in the names, in the faces, in the DNA that crossed color lines even when the world tried to deny it. This was the hidden foundation of a nation that called itself free. The secret history that polite society refused to face. The crimes that hid beneath the white columns of the South, behind every hymn sung in church, behind every word of righteousness. They thought their secrets would die with them. But truth doesn't die. It waits. And when the time came, it spoke not through confession, but through the descendants who bore their features, their names, their blood. Every modern discovery, every uncovered record, every family tree that didn't quite match became a quiet form of justice. The past couldn't be erased anymore. The story of slavery isn't just about forced labor. It's about power so absolute that it sought to possess even love itself. It's about men who worshiped control and destroyed themselves in the process. It's about women who endured what no one should endure, and yet lived, survived, and carried the memory forward in silence. The world still struggles to face these truths. Even now, people speak of the Old South with nostalgia, painting a fantasy of charm and grace. But the real South was built on terror, soaked in blood, and haunted by the screams that history tried to silence. Truth is never comfortable, but to ignore it is to keep living inside that lie. America's wealth, its culture, even its very bloodline is stained by the crimes that were hidden under the illusion of power. And until we face that, the past will keep whispering in every wind that blows across those empty fields. Because power doesn't disappear, it mutates, it hides. And the silence that protected it once still lingers in the stories untold, in the monuments unchallenged, in the faces that carry the memory of both master and slave. But truth endures. It breathes in every descendant who asks, "Where did I come from?" It lives in every historian who refuses to look away. And it speaks through every voice that breaks the silence. The masters may have believed they owned the past, but they were wrong. The past belongs to those who remember.